In the heart of the ruthless prairies, where every dawn can be the last, fate has brought three people from different worlds together. She is an exile, a stranger among her own people. He is a Comanche warrior, raised by the winds in war. Between them was a child whose life hung in the balance. Their meeting changed everything. Subscribe to find out how a single act of kindness can turn enemies into allies. Her name was Catherine, but in the town they often whispered another word behind her back: exile. It stuck to her like a burdock to a hem, and over the years it became part of her name. No matter how much time had passed, it still sounded in other people's thoughts, as soon as she walked down the street or looked into the store. Catherine's house stood at the very edge of a dusty street, where the last sagging fences gave way to a brown carpet of sun-scorched grass. Beyond them, the steppe began, vast and ruthless, like the people who lived nearby. When the sun rose, the first rays illuminated not houses or streets, but deserted expanses, as if reminding everyone that the real power here belongs to the winds and heat, and man is only a guest. In the morning, she opened the window, and along with the warm air, the smell of dry earth, dust and wormwood rushed into the house. The gray plaque immediately settled on the windowsill, on the old table, on everything that got in the way. In summer, the heat was so intense that even the creaking of the floorboards sounded tired. In winter, the steppe was blanketed by a snowstorm, but it was summer that remained in my memory, ruthless and viscous, when the air trembled from the heat, and the days passed slowly, like thick honey. She lived alone. After the death of her mother and the mysterious disappearance of her father, no one took care of the girl. For the first few days, the neighbors brought food, sometimes they asked if they needed help, but gradually the doors closed, and the eyes became cautious and cold. No one in the town liked unnecessary questions, but they didn't give away trust either. Catherine's past was shrouded in a fog of rumors. The old men around the campfires recalled her family's long-standing feud with an influential ranchero. The women in the queue at the well were whispering about stealing horses. Men over a mug of whiskey in a saloon told a story about an unhappy love that ended in blood. No one knew which of this was true, but everyone was sure that there was a page in her life that was better not to turn over. Catherine didn't argue. She has learned to remain silent and accept that people have long passed their verdict. Her silence became her shield, and her stubborn gaze became her weapon. Her world shrank to a small house and a few jobs that brought bread: washing clothes for single men, caring for wounded horses, mending clothes. Everything repeated itself day after day, without change, like two identical prints. And yet there was longing inside her. Sometimes in the evening, when the steppe was turning into warm golden tones and the sky was slowly darkening, she would sit by the window and look at the road stretching beyond the horizon. At such moments, her heart was squeezed by a strange feeling, similar to homesickness, which she had never had. The road beckoned her to a place where there were no other people's stares and old grudges. But every time she forced herself to turn away. Leaving town meant admitting defeat, and Catherine wasn't going to give up. Children playing in the dust fell silent as she passed by. The women turned away, the men cast short, appraising glances. It was her familiar reality, and she learned to live inside these invisible walls. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't always be like this. One day everything will change. The road, along which she had so often watched the rare wagons, would one day come to life under the hooves of other people's horses. And with them, the wind of change will blow into her life. She did not know that this day was already near, and that it would begin with the quiet, hungry gaze of a small child who appeared at the edge of her yard. That morning started like hundreds of others. The hot sun rose above the horizon, spreading gold across the endless steppe. A dusty wind stirred the dry grass stalks, and a transparent haze of smoke stretched over the road, as if the earth exhaled the tired warmth of the night. Catherine was going to the well to get water when something made her stop on the threshold. At the edge of the yard, by the sagging fence, she noticed a barely discernible figure. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's kid who decided to look for a lost ball or tease her, as he used to. But when she looked closer, she realized that this boy was a stranger to her. He stood slightly bent over, as if his strength could barely keep him on his feet. He was wearing a rough, tattered buckskin shirt, stained with dirt and dried blood. Her long dark hair was matted and matted, hiding part of her face. His gaze was wary, dark as a prairie at night. He was hungry, it was evident from the hollow cheeks and the way he pressed his hands to his stomach. Catherine knew instantly who he was. By his features, clothes, and even the way he stood, the boy did not belong to their town, but to the people who lived on the other side of the border, the Comanches. People here spoke about them in different ways, some with respect, some with hatred. But almost everyone considered them enemies. Catherine's heart began to beat faster. She knew that if only one of the neighbors saw him in her yard, trouble would be unavoidable. It was considered treason in the town. They could have been kicked out, they could have been deprived of their homes, and in the worst case, they could have been executed without trial. The boy, noticing that he was seen, did not move from his place. He seemed to freeze to the ground, like an animal sensing a predator. Catherine took a step, and he staggered back, ready to run, but weakness was clearly taking its toll. At that moment, she saw that there was a dried wound on his leg, just above the knee, surrounded by red streaks of inflammation. The sun burned mercilessly, and fever shone in his eyes. Catherine's gaze swept over the horizon, no one. Only the waving grass and the distant silhouettes of vultures in the sky. She knew what to do. Even though my mind whispered that it was better to move away, close the door and forget, my heart demanded something else. Carefully, slowly, she raised her hands, palms up, as if to show that she was not going to cause harm. Then she slowly went to the well, filled a mug and, returning, set it on the ground a few steps away from the boy. He stared for a long time, then took a step, another, and finally hungrily fell into the water. Catherine had already taken out a piece of bread and a thin slice of dried meat from the house. She put the food next to the mug and moved away so as not to scare it off. The boy ate slowly, as if he feared it was a trap, but every crumb disappeared. When he finished, he looked up at her. There was everything in that look: fatigue, gratitude, distrust, and some kind of deep, almost animal sadness. Catherine realized that she couldn't just let him go. If he leaves now, he might not reach his tribe. She motioned him into the house. The boy froze, hesitated, but then, with a barely perceptible nod, took the first step towards the threshold. Catherine knew that this step would change her life. She hadn't realized yet that with this child, everything she'd been avoiding for so long would enter her world: danger, distrust, and perhaps something more. That morning started like hundreds of others. The hot sun rose above the horizon, spreading gold across the endless steppe. A dusty wind stirred the dry grass stalks, and a transparent haze of smoke stretched over the road, as if the earth exhaled the tired warmth of the night. Catherine was going to the well to get water when something made her stop on the threshold. At the edge of the yard, by the sagging fence, she noticed a barely discernible figure. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's kid who decided to look for a lost ball or tease her, as he used to. But when she looked closer, she realized that this boy was a stranger to her. He stood slightly bent over, as if his strength could barely keep him on his feet. He was wearing a rough, tattered buckskin shirt, stained with dirt and dried blood. Her long dark hair was matted and matted, hiding part of her face. His gaze was wary, dark as a prairie at night. He was hungry, it was evident from the hollow cheeks and the way he pressed his hands to his stomach. Catherine knew instantly who he was. By his features, clothes, and even the way he stood, the boy did not belong to their town, but to the people who lived on the other side of the border, the Comanches. People here spoke about them in different ways, some with respect, others with hatred. But almost everyone considered them enemies. Catherine's heart began to beat faster. She knew that as soon as one of the neighbors saw him in her yard, trouble would come. It was considered treason in the town. They could have been kicked out, they could have been deprived of their homes, and in the worst case, they could have been executed without trial. The boy, noticing that he was seen, did not move from his place. He seemed to freeze to the ground, like an animal sensing a predator. Catherine took a step, and he staggered back, ready to run, but weakness was clearly taking its toll. At that moment, she saw that there was a dried wound on his leg, just above the knee, surrounded by red streaks of inflammation. The sun burned mercilessly, and fever shone in his eyes. Catherine's gaze swept over the horizon, no one. Only the waving grass and the distant silhouettes of vultures in the sky. She knew what to do. Even though my mind whispered that it was better to move away, close the door and forget, my heart demanded something else. Carefully, slowly, she raised her hands, palms up, as if to show that she was not going to cause harm. Then she slowly went to the well, filled a mug and, returning, set it on the ground a few steps away from the boy. He stared for a long time, then took a step, another, and finally hungrily fell into the water. Catherine had already taken out a piece of bread and a thin slice of dried meat from the house. She put the food next to the mug and moved away so as not to scare it off. The boy ate slowly, as if he was afraid it was a trap, but every crumb disappeared. When he finished, he looked up at her. There was everything in that look: fatigue, gratitude, distrust, and some kind of deep, almost animal sadness. Catherine realized that she couldn't just let him go. If he leaves now, he might not reach his tribe. She motioned him into the house. The boy froze, hesitated, but then, with a barely perceptible nod, took the first step towards the threshold. Catherine knew that this step would change her life. She hadn't realized yet that with this child, everything she'd been avoiding for so long would enter her world: danger, distrust, and perhaps something more. With the first rays of the morning sun, when the golden light began to slowly spread through the dusty streets of a small village, something elusive hung in the air: anxiety and expectation. The residents, already awake, exchanged whispers and glances full of distrust and fear. Someone noticed strange footprints near the house of a girl living on the outskirts, small, barely noticeable footprints that contrasted sharply with the usual dusty surroundings. The footprints were not just small, they seemed too light and uncertain, as if left by a child who was in a hurry, afraid of being noticed. The rumors spread through the village with incredible speed. Every whisper multiplied the story, overgrown with new details. Someone said that they saw a shadow flicker near the exile's house. Someone claimed that they heard strange noises coming from her yard. The rumors were like a fire engulfing dry grass. They devoured trust and tranquility, turning neighbors into suspicious observers. There were old wounds and fresh fears in the village, stories of Comanche raids, how their warriors ruthlessly attacked peaceful settlements, took women and children with them, and destroyed everything in their path. These stories lived vividly in the minds of every resident, generating fear and hatred. And now, in their quietest part, there could be a threat that threatened the entire community. The townspeople were not going to put up with the fact that someone they considered an outsider and an exile could help the enemy. In this climate of suspicion and fear, any expression of compassion was perceived as betrayal. Rumors about a Comanche child who might have been hiding in the girl's house provoked rage and determination to punish not only him, but everyone who could stand up for him. The girl felt like she was turning into a traitor in the eyes of her neighbors, and that look was colder than any winter night. Inside the house, everything seemed to shrink, as if the walls were going to pile on top. The girl stood at the window, peering out into the street, where silhouettes flashed and a muffled hum of voices could be heard. Every step outside echoed in her soul, making her heart beat faster, mixing fear and determination. She knew that if her secret got out, the consequences would be disastrous. She herself could be exiled, accused of betrayal, and the child could be condemned to a terrible fate. But stronger than the fear was her determination to help. She remembered the boy's frightened eyes, his fragile body, and how he trusted her at a moment when the whole world had turned away. This trust became an anchor for her, which kept her from surrendering to fear. She realized that her choice to help or betray was not just a matter of survival, but a test of her humanity and fortitude. With every passing minute, the internal struggle became more acute. She felt like two worlds collided in her, a world of cruel rules and fear on the outside, and a world of compassion and hope on the inside. Her thoughts were torn between the fear of losing everything and the desire to save someone who had no other chance. This choice was hard, like a stone that pulled her down, but at the same time gave her the strength to fight. Outside, the wind blew the dust off the ground, as if emphasizing the tension of the moment. The girl understood that this night would be crucial. The fate of the child, herself, and perhaps the entire town depends on what her next step will be. She knew that there was no turning back, and every action would have consequences that would be impossible to back down from. An inner voice told her to take risks, to face fear for the sake of what she thought was right. But outside, there are blank stares, whispers, and hatred. This eternal struggle between good and evil, fear and courage, that was what determined her path now. And at that moment, she stood on the threshold of a new challenge, a test that would change everything. Evening slowly descended on the edge of the wild border, slowly plunging the village into deep darkness, only occasionally pierced by the last fiery reflections of sunset. In a house that seemed like a safe shelter from the outside world, the girl sat by a flickering fire, the only source of warmth and light in this harsh place. The flames danced and cast vivid shadows on the cracked walls, as if reviving old memories and disturbing thoughts. A boy was dozing quietly on a rough straw mat nearby. His emaciated body, covered with dust spots and traces of wounds, gradually relaxed under the gentle flickering of the fire. His face was thin and fragile, with dark eyes that had been sparkling with fear a short time ago, but now they were slowly closing, giving way to sleep. Despite his fatigue, he retained the mysterious power conveyed by the spirit of the Comanche tribe, fortitude and determination in the face of adversity. The girl sat next to him, listening attentively to his quiet, intermittent story. His words were simple, sometimes interrupted by awkward gestures, but behind every sound and movement there was a deep pain of loss and despair. The boy was talking about his father, a great Comanche warrior, a man who was not just a defender of the tribe, but a symbol of honor and courage. He told how their family had been torn apart and destroyed. The echoes of the violence and brutality of those distant days had forever left scars in his soul. The girl's gaze slid over his exhausted face, and her heart was filled with a heavy sense of responsibility. Her own life, full of loneliness and exile, now seemed closely connected with the fate of this child, to whom she had given shelter. Her resolve to protect him at all costs, despite the dangers looming over them, grew stronger in her soul. Outside, the night air was filled with the sounds of wildlife. In the distance, a coyote howled shrilly, his voice echoing across the vast prairies, reminding of the ruthlessness of the world around him. The crackling of the campfire in the house created a cozy but fragile barrier between them and the darkness, in which lurked threats and the unknown. From time to time, the sound of hooves could be heard in the distance, a sign that horsemen could appear on the horizon, and this thought added to the tension and anxiety. On this night, it seemed as if nature itself held its breath to watch the destinies intertwined on the border of two worlds. The silence around them was filled with expectation, the expectation of a meeting that could change everything, turn the lives of the heroine and the child upside down. This night was not just a pause before the storm, but a time when every breath and every movement acquired a special meaning. The girl quietly touched the boy's arm to make sure he was safe, and her gaze went to the darkness outside the window, where the distant stars twinkled. There was a mixture of fear, hope, and determination in her heart. She knew that tomorrow was the day when the fates would converge and no one would remain the same. The night was short, but full of meaning. There were quiet promises in her depths, promises of struggle, loyalty, and new hope. It was the night before the meeting, the night when the two worlds were on the verge of a fateful collision. The early morning on the border of the Wild West began to slowly come to life under the soft light of the rising sun, which barely touched the dusty paths and simple wooden buildings of a small village. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the sense of herbs and earth coming to life. Silence enveloped everything, as if nature was holding its breath, anticipating an important event. The girl left the house cautiously, feeling her every movement filled with nervous anticipation. My heart was pounding louder than usual, and my eyes stared intently into the distance, where a silhouette appeared on the horizon. The tall figure of the Comanche warrior towered against the background of the first rays of the sun. His gait was confident and sedate, as if the very spirit of the prairie accompanied his steps. Every move seemed well thought out and filled with strength that neither time nor trials could break. The battle paints applied to his face and body created bizarre patterns, standing out vividly against his tan skin. Red spoke of bravery and strength, black, of connection with the world of spirits and ancestors, white, of purity of intentions and loyalty to traditions. A heavy cloak of skins lay on his shoulders, reminding him of the severity of the battles he had lived through and the responsibility for the tribe. In his hands he held a spear decorated with eagle feathers and turquoise sparkling in the morning light. The warrior's eyes were deep and expressive, and they reflected the history of an entire nation: pride, pain, wisdom, and tenderness. Those eyes looked not with rage, but with understanding and careful respect, like at a woman who had saved his child, risking her own life and freedom. The girl froze, meeting his gaze. Mixed feelings flared up in her soul, the fear of the unknown, the hope of understanding and the desire to protect the one whom she has tamed with her care. The boy standing next to him felt his father's presence, and sincere emotions were reflected in his gaze. He felt both fear and long-awaited joy, which had been absent from his life for so long. The warrior took a few steps forward, his gait measured, almost solemn. He examined the boy carefully, and then turned his gaze to the girl, as if trying to read her intentions and feelings in her eyes. There was a tense silence in the air, a moment filled with silent dialogue and deep mutual understanding. This first contact between them was not just a meeting, but a ritual of recognition and respect, a bridge between two different worlds that are now intertwined in the destinies of these people. The girl saw in his eyes not an enemy, but a defender, a man who, despite all the differences, values life and family. The warrior realized that in front of him was not a stranger, but a woman with a strong spirit and a kind heart, ready to fight for the sake of saving the child. The sun's rays were already beginning to warm the earth, dispelling the morning chill and illuminating a new page in their common history. This dawn was not just the beginning of a new day, but a symbol of hope, trust and strength that can overcome all obstacles. Determination blossomed in the girl's soul. Now she is not alone. In front of her stood a warrior whose strength and wisdom could be a defense against all adversity. There is a promise of support and respect in his gaze. Together they could change their fate, despite the cruelty and injustice of the Wild West. So, against the background of endless prairies, among the flames of the rising sun and the whisper of the wind, a new story was born, a story of unity, struggle and mutual respect, which would become a bulwark in this harsh world. With the sunrise, which now completely flooded the endless prairies with its brightness, disturbing news spread in the town where ancient and cruel justice ruled. One of the neighbors was alerted by the appearance of a stranger near the girl's house, a Comanche warrior, whose silhouette and battle colors could not go unnoticed. In the early morning, when the light was just beginning to touch the corners of the crooked streets, people saw the figure of a warrior standing majestically at the edge of the courtyard, as if looking at the world through age-old wisdom. This sight instantly caused a storm of feelings, from distrust to open hostility. The memory of the past lived in the city, about raids and wars that took away families and homes from many. Therefore, even a hint of the presence of an outsider was perceived as a call to danger and possible betrayal. Rumors spread instantly. Some claimed that the warrior had been seen near the exile's house, others that he had come to set fire to the settlement or lead his men to a new massacre. Those who did not want to wait and look at what was happening calmly began to gather among the residents. Men with hard faces and heavy hands, accustomed to defending their families and property with weapons, left their homes. Their gazes were filled with determination and anger. They couldn't let their peace of mind be destroyed by someone they considered an enemy. Guns and knives hung on their shoulders, and a willingness to act without warning burned in their hearts. The men are gathered in a small group, whispering among themselves, discussing a plan to protect the city from the threat they see in this new situation. There was no doubt in their minds that they needed to act quickly and decisively to prevent the danger that, in their opinion, was already too close. Each of them felt that not just peace of mind was at stake, but the very safety and honor of their community. Meanwhile, an oppressive silence reigned in the girl's house. Her heart was racing, and her thoughts were racing between fear and determination. She could hear distant voices, footsteps, and the metallic clink of weapons. She understood that the danger she would have to face was coming. The shadow of the approaching conflict played outside the windows, and she knew that her choices and actions were more important now than ever. The Comanche warrior was awake. He was secretly observing the situation from the shadows, hidden from view, but every move was carefully calibrated. His body was tense, ready to fight, but there was no mindless rage in it. His gaze, sharp and attentive, followed every step of the armed men, assessing the threat and looking for a moment when it would be necessary to intervene. He understood that the fate of the boy and the woman who had become his new home could be decided in the coming minutes. The sound of the wind blowing dry leaves and small stones penetrated through the tension of the atmosphere. There was an oppressive pause in the air, as if nature itself was waiting for the outcome of this clash. No one dared to take the first step, for fear of provoking the irreversible. A mixture of fear, rage, and hope burned in every heart, the hope that this conflict would end without bloodshed, but the willingness that the world would now change forever. Time seemed to slow down. Glances from both sides crossed in tense silence. And although not a single shot had been fired yet, the whole neighborhood was already feeling the foretaste of the storm that was about to break out. The warrior knew that he had to protect those whom he had tamed with his care and trust. And he was ready to do it at any cost to save the child's life and preserve the fragile hope of peace between two worlds that could no longer exist separately. The morning light spread across the room, where the girl and the warrior were alone for the first time after long hours of tense silence and danger. Her reddish hair, still damp from the morning dew, shimmered softly in the sunlight. He looked at her with careful respect, shadows played in his painted face, and every movement was filled with hidden meaning. It was as if an invisible bridge had appeared between them, a bridge of understanding and trust that withstood the storms of prejudice and fear. She carefully handed him a small bag of herbs and dried flowers, a gift that meant peace and respect in her world. The warrior accepted the gift with a deep bow, his eyes softened, and gratitude could be heard in this gesture. In response, he took from his belt a thin string of beads with feathers, the symbol of his family and tribe, and handed it to her, as if offering a piece of his soul. Their eyes met. There was a whole conversation in these silent exchanges. Words were not needed when hearts spoke for themselves. There was an elusive energy in the air that wove a thin thread of intimacy between them, despite the ruthless world outside the walls of this house. The warrior quietly ran his hand across the table, pointing out small details, tribal patterns, symbols that told stories of courage and loyalty. The girl listened, trying to understand not only the words, but also the depth of the feelings that were hidden behind each sign. Her own view reflected an inner struggle, how to keep hope alive when distrust and hatred reign around. He understood her fears, too. Ancient traditions and a new feeling were fighting in his soul, which was born here, in the silence of their meetings. There was strength in his every move, but at the same time, there was a tenderness that he only allowed her to show. The wind blowing outside the window played with the curtains, bringing the scent of prairies and distant mountains. This element seemed to whisper about the changes that would inevitably come. She felt that there was not just a bond between them, but a promise to fight for the right to be together in a world where separation seemed insurmountable. From time to time, their eyes met, and the whole range of emotions was hidden in these glances, from timid sympathy to determination to move forward no matter what. The words were short and precise, but each one carried a deep meaning. They talked about how in both worlds there is darkness and light, hatred and honor, betrayal and loyalty. At that moment, the house ceased to be just a shelter, it became a symbol of a new beginning. A place where the paths of two different but equally strong souls crossed. They had not only the fate of the child in their hands, but also the opportunity to change the attitude of the entire community, to begin a new cycle of life where respect and understanding could replace fear and hostility. Silence enveloped the room again, but now it didn't seem heavy or threatening. It was the silence of hope, the kind that comes after storms and battles, when the heart is ready to receive the light and let it blossom. Their closeness, albeit timid, was already a reality, and every new day promised to reveal this story further, despite all the trials. She spent the morning trying to stay calm, but her anxiety grew like a dark cloud on the horizon. The news of the approaching danger reached her through the whispers of the wind and the anxious glances stolen from passing travelers. She knew that the warriors' tribe, which had now become a part of her world, was on the verge of disaster. A military unit was approaching ahead, harsh and ruthless, or perhaps bandits eager for profit and destruction. In this place, where the boundary between the two worlds was thin, any invasion could be the beginning of bloodshed and death. A storm was brewing in her soul, the desire to keep herself safe and the fear of unknown risks. Staying in a house where she was already considered a stranger and a traitor meant leaving those who needed help. But to step out into danger is to step into an abyss where every wrong step could cost a life. She remembered the boy's eyes, his weak breathing, and in the look of a warrior full of determination and sadness, she understood that the fate of not only this child, but the entire tribe depended on her decision. The days that followed the meeting with the warrior were filled with anxiety, but also with quiet hope. She realized that her path was now connected with these people, and the loneliness that had once seemed inevitable was giving way to a new meaning. The desire to fight grew stronger in the woman's heart, despite the fears and threats that surrounded her from all sides. Through the windows of the house, she watched the horizon, where dust clouds rose into the sky, a sign of the approach of strangers. The sun was already rising high, illuminating a strip of prairie, along which the footsteps of a formidable army rolled. Silence thickened around her, broken only by the occasional cries of birds and the rustle of grass, under which danger lurked. The decision matured quickly to stay away meant to doom the tribe to certain death. She was gathering all her strength in her soul, preparing to take a step that could change everything. Taking the most necessary things with her and carefully covering her tracks, she went out onto the road, heading towards the warriors' camp. Every step echoed in her heart, a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. The path was difficult, the heat of the fiery steppe, the shifting shadows of the trees, and the constant feeling that she was being watched. She knew that it was impossible to make a mistake, because behind her was not just a village, but her new family. With every passing minute, she was approaching the camp, where the tribal forces were preparing for a possible battle, and the spirits of the ancestors were silently watching their fate. At the moment when the first silhouettes of the warrior appeared on the horizon, the girl felt her fear recede before the inner light of determination. She was willing to take risks to protect those she loved and became a part of their world. This act, a step into the unknown, could be the beginning of a new path, a path where boundaries were blurred, and man and the spirit of the tribe merged in the struggle for life and freedom. The silence around them seemed deafening, but there was hope in it, the hope that kindness and courage could overcome hatred and destruction. The girl walked forward, and every step she took spoke of her willingness to accept the consequences, of faith in the power of light even in the darkest times. The scorching sun rose higher and higher, illuminating the scorched earth where the two worlds converged. On the one hand, there are residents of the city, armed with guns and determined to defend their territory. On the other hand, the warriors of the tribe are proud and unwavering, ready to defend their home and honor. Between them lay a strip of scorched grass, a narrow line where time stood still. The girl stood in the middle of this invisible front, feeling every heartbeat reverberate in her temples. Behind her was the city, with its stone faces and harsh words full of fear and prejudice. In front of her was a tribe whose eyes reflected the pain of loss and ancient wisdom, but also a willingness to shed blood. Her journey here was a decision that could not be abandoned. She knew that any wrong move could turn a tense silence into a hurricane of violence. The air was trembling with anticipation, even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. There was a dull sound from the left, someone in the city had pulled the shutter. To the right, in the ranks of warriors, feathers and amulets trembled in time with heavy breaths. The men's faces turned to stone, and their hands tightened on their weapons. She could feel the Comanche warrior's gaze finding her in the midst of this chaos. He stood slightly in front of his people, tall, muscular, with a painted face where every color spoke of strength, loyalty and pain. There was no anger in his eyes, but a deep, calm determination. A silent thread passed between them, memories of meetings, quiet gestures and rare words that managed to connect them in a world full of distrust. But now it all came down to a single moment, in which not only the fate of the tribe and the city was being decided, but also their own. The girl took a step forward, and this step became the boundary between the past and the future. She raised her hands, addressing both sides, not with words, but with the power of her presence. Her figure against the dusty horizon has become a symbol that peace is still possible. The seconds dragged on endlessly. Somewhere in the distance, a bird screamed, and the sound tore through the stillness like a thin thread. Someone lowered his weapon, another took a step back. The sun was slowly sinking, painting the sky in warm tones. She turned her head to the warrior. Their gazes met for the last time, and it contained everything: gratitude for the life they had saved, sadness for what was not meant to be, and a quiet acceptance that their paths were now diverging. He bowed his head slightly, as one does in respect, and then turned away, leading his people away from the coming disaster. On the other hand, the city was slowly receding, disappearing into the evening shadows. The girl was left standing alone, between the departing people, in the midst of silence, which now was not a threat, but a fragile peace. Her heart was beating in an anxious but steady rhythm. She knew that this day had changed everything. When the last silhouettes disappeared over the horizon, the wind picked up the dust and carried it away, as if erasing the traces of what could have been a tragedy. And on the border of two worlds, there was only the memory of a look that would keep her warm on long, cold evenings. Thank you for spending this time together and diving into our history in the Wild West. If you like this story, please like it, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any exciting new chapters. See you soon. May the spirit of freedom and strength always be with you.